Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really focusing in on a critical time, the very beginning of the ministry of the Bab. We're looking specifically at 1844 through to 1853.
Exactly. A really pivotal decade. You see the emergence of the Bob, these huge claims he's making, and just the immediate seismic impact.
It sounds incredibly dramatic. And for this deep dive, we're mainly drawing on excerpts from God Passes By, right?
Yeah.
Using its historical take on this period.
That's the plan. It gives us a strong narrative thread for these foundational years.
Okay, so our mission here is to pull out the key events, the initial reactions, what the Babi faith looked like in its earliest form during this first decade. We want to give a clear picture of these, well, intense beginnings.
Makes sense. It's a period of intense upheaval and profound revelation.
So let's start right at the beginning. Shiraz, 1844, the Bab makes his declaration. What was so, well, revolutionary about it right out of the gate?
Well, you have to understand the context. Persia at that time, deeply rooted in Shia Islam, waiting for the Qayyim, the promised one. And then the Bab declares he is that figure. I mean, that's not just a small claim. It's a fundamental challenge to the existing religious and social order. It was immediate, profound.
And almost immediately, he reveals the Qayyum al-Azma. It's described as the first, the greatest, and mightiest book of this new dispensation. That sounds incredibly significant.
Oh, absolutely foundational. And the content. Well, it set the stage for everything that followed in those early years.
So what was in it? What were these core messages hitting people right at the start?
Okay, so first, it was incredibly bold politically. Direct warnings to kings, rulers.
Warnings, like general warnings or...
No, specific. It actually predicted the downfall of the reigning monarch, Muhammad Shah. And it even directly commanded his chief minister, Haji Mirza Akwasi, to basically give up his power.
Wow. That's playing with fire right from day one.
You could say that it was a direct challenge to their authority, framed as divine command.
And it wasn't just the political figures, was it?
Not at all. It also strongly admonished the Muslim clergy, the whole ecclesiastical order, especially the Shia community, calling on them to recognize this new day.
Okay, so challenges, warnings, but was there more? Anything pointing forward?
Yes, definitely. And this is crucial. Even in this very first major work, the Bab extols the virtues of Baha'u'llah, though not always by that name yet. He uses titles like Remnant of God, Most Great Master.
So he's already preparing the ground for another figure to come right in the beginning.
Exactly. He's signaling that his own revelation, momentous as it is also the gateway to something even greater. It proclaimed the Babi faith's independence, its universality.
Universality, so looking beyond Persia.
Yes, it even included a call to the people of the West to arise and help the cause. Alongside this, though, were pretty stark warnings of God's terrible vengeance, the most great fire for those who rejected the new law.
A real mix of invitation and warning then.
Precisely. And very personally, it foreshadowed the Bab's own martyrdom. It praised the future people of Baha, predicted that some early prominent Babis would perhaps fade in their conviction, and foretold afflictive torment for those who usurped religious authority. It's dense with meaning.
It's incredible how much was packed into that initial revelation. So, after Shiraz, he travels. Where did he go in these early years? Within our 1844-53 window.
Right. He undertook the pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina. The sources we're focusing on don't detail the reactions there exhaustively, but it was part of establishing his mission.
Okay.
Then he returned to Persia, to Bushehr. Events there led to him being brought back to Shiraz and confined for a time.
So opposition started fairly early.
Yes, the authorities were becoming aware and concerned, but he was eventually released from that initial confinement, and that release allowed him to travel to Isfahan in September 1846.
Isfahan. Now that seems like a really key moment in this early decade. His influence really grew there, didn't it?
It absolutely exploded. This was 1846 to 1847. He was received by the governor, Manucher Khan, who was known to be quite powerful, but also somewhat independent-minded.
Okay.
And significantly, he stayed as a guest of Mirza Syed Muhammad, the Imam Jamoy. This wasn't just any cleric. He was the leading religious figure in Isfahan, the Sultan Ulama, king of the scholars.
So he's being hosted by the top religious authority in the city. That's quite a statement.
It really was. And the Bab's impact on the people was, well, immense. There were these accounts, of crowds clamoring outside, trying to get even the water he'd used for his ablutions.
Wow, that level of fervor.
Exactly. And the host himself, the Imam Jamia, was reportedly so captivated that he personally served the Bab, attending to his needs. This is the chief cleric waiting on his guest.
That paints a powerful picture.
Mm.
Did anything specific happen there, intellectually or spiritually, that cemented this influence?
Yes, a very notable event. The Imam Jumai asked the Bab to write a commentary on a specific chapter of the Quran, the Surah Valar. And the Bab did so, apparently with incredible speed, revealing verses said to equal about a third of the Quran in just a few hours, focusing on the mystical meaning of the first letter.
In a few hours.
That's the account. And this display of rapid, profound revelation had a huge impact on those who witnessed it, especially the Imam Jamal.
I can imagine. How did he react?
He was seemingly completely won over. He apparently wanted to dedicate his entire fortune to the Bab's cause. He wanted to try and convert the Shah himself, and even proposed that the Bab marry his sister. He saw this as the dawn of a new era.
So this seems like a high point. But we know things took a turn. This growing influence must have triggered serious opposition, still within this 1844-53 period.
Absolutely. It was almost inevitable. The more influence the Bab gained, especially winning over figures like the Imam Jumai, the more alarmed the other high-ranking clergy, the mujtahids and ulamas became.
They saw him as a threat.
A fundamental threat to their authority and the traditional interpretation of Islam. They started gathering, consulting, and eventually produced documents denouncing the Bab as a heretic, demanding his death.
And what about the Imam Jumi? The one who was so devoted?
This is one of the really tragic parts of the story from Isfahan. The pressure mounted intensely, and eventually even he, Mirza Sid Muhammad, was compelled to sign a statement declaring the Bab was mentally unsound, lacking reason.
Wow. After wanting to give everything. That shows the kind of pressure he must have been under.
Immense pressure. It highlights the power of the established clergy and the danger the Bab represented to them.
So how did this rising tide of opposition lead to his imprisonment? Did the governor, Manuchir Khan, try to help?
He did, for a time. Manuchir Khan seems to have been genuinely impressed by the Bab, maybe even a believer, it's not entirely clear. But he was caught between his inclinations and the demands of the clergy and ultimately the Shah.
A difficult position.
Very. His solution was, well, a bit cloak and dagger. He pretended to send the Bab off towards the capital, Tehran, as ordered, but actually he hid the Bab in his own private residence for about 4 months.
Trying to shield him.
Yes. But then something the Bab had apparently foretold happened. Manuchir Khan died suddenly.
The protector was gone.
Exactly. And his successor, or the deputy, Gurjan Khan, was not sympathetic. He informed the Shah the Bab was still there. A second summons came from Tehran.
So off to the capital this time.
That was the order. But then another twist. The Shah's chief minister, the same Aji Mirza Akwasi, the Bab had told to abdicate.
Right, him again.
He intervened. Perhaps fearing the Bab's influence in the capital, or for other political reasons, he had the destination changed. So instead of Tehran, the Bab was sent under guard and in disguise to the remote fortress of Maku in the province of Azerbaijan. This was early 1847.
Maku, that sounds isolated.
Extremely. It was known as the Open Mountain. Very harsh conditions, cold, remote, and he was allowed very few companions. A stark contrast to the reception in Isfahan.
A dramatic shift in circumstances within just a couple of years. But even from Maku, his influence didn't just stop, did it? He was summoned again.
That's right. Despite the isolation, word spread, his writings continued, and eventually the authorities decided they needed to confront him more formally. He was summoned from Maku to Tabriz.
Tabriz. For what purpose?
For an official examination. A council is convened, including high-ranking clergy and, significantly, the heir to the throne, the young Nariddin Mirza. This was a major event, still within that early 1847-1848 period.
A direct confrontation with the powers that be. What happened there? How did the Bab respond?
He was questioned about his claims, and his response was unequivocal, powerful. According to the accounts, he declared clearly and forcefully, I am the promised one.
No ambiguity there. A public declaration right in front of the crown prince and the leading clergy.
Exactly. A direct public assertion of his messianic station. It left no doubt about the nature of his claim.
So even while facing imprisonment and increasing danger, the Bab seems to be preparing his followers. There's a lot of focus on him whom God shall make manifest. Why was this so central, even in these turbulent early years?
It was arguably the core of his mission beyond his own station. From the very beginning, he emphasized he was the gate, the announcer, preparing the way for an even greater divine educator.
The promised one of all religions, essentially.
That's how it's understood. And He actively worked to instill this anticipation in his key disciples during this 1844-53 period. He gave them specific indications, sometimes prophecies.
Like what? Can you give some examples?
Sure. He told one follower, Mullah Bakir, that he would actually meet the promised one face to face. Another, Sayagh, got a similar verbal promise. He specifically directed Mullah Hussein, his first disciple, towards Tehran, telling him he'd find a great mystery there.
Tehran, hinting at Baha'u'llah's location.
It's certainly interpreted that way. He told Quddus, another leading disciple, that he would attain the presence of the object of adoration. He told Sheikh Hassani Zunuzi he would encounter the promised Hussein, referring to Baha'u'llah, in Karbala.
So, very specific guidance for different individuals.
Yes, and he conferred titles, too. Dayan was named the third letter to believe in him whom God shall make manifest. He informed another, Ahom, about the name and the near approach of the one who would fulfill and complete the Bab's revelation. It was constant preparation.
And this emphasis is reflected strongly in the Bab's own writings from this period, too.
Overwhelmingly so. His references to him whom God shall make manifest are filled with, well, utter reverence and humility regarding his own station in comparison.
What kind of things did he write?
He'd say things like, I verily am the first to adore him and the first to bow down before him. He stressed that nothing he said or wrote, not even in the Bayan, his own most holy book, could truly capture the reality of the promised one.
So, he elevated the coming one above his own scripture.
Absolutely. He called the entire Bayan just a leaf amongst the leaves of his paradise. He stated that one verse from him whom God shall make manifest would outweigh the entire Bayan.
That's incredible self-abnegation from a manifestation of God.
It is. He described his own revelation as a seed planted to reach its perfection only through the appearance of the promised one. All the glory of the Bayan, he said, came from that future manifestation. He famously described himself as merely a ring upon the hand of him whom God shall make manifest.
A ring on his hand, just signifying his presence.
Exactly, a sign, a precursor. He even said that concepts like certitude and testimony would be ashamed to try and validate the truth of the promised one. His reality would be self-evident, beyond human confirmation.
And he was uncompromising about belief in him.
Completely. He stated he would unhesitatingly disown any of his own followers who denied the promised one, but would embrace a believer in him even if they came from a different religious background entirely. The focus was absolute.
This preparation for the future is so striking. But meanwhile, in the present of that 1844-53 decade, the situation for the Babis was becoming increasingly dire. You mentioned opposition, but it escalated to outright persecution.
It did, tragically. The Bab's claims, his growing following, the boldness of his teachings, it all created a nationwide storm of controversy. The clergy felt deeply threatened, and they worked closely with civil authorities to suppress the movement.
When did it really intensify?
A key turning point was the death of Muhammad Shah in 1848. His successor's chief minister, Amir Niam, was particularly ruthless and launched a systematic, brutal campaign against the Babis.
A systematic campaign.
Yes, it wasn't just sporadic local opposition anymore. It became state policy, instigated by both religious and government powers working together. This led to horrific massacres and sieges in several places.
Where did these major persecutions happen within this initial decade?
The most prominent were the upheavals at Sheikh Tabarsi in Mazandaran, the events in Nairis in the south, Zanjan in the northwest, and also significant persecution in the capital, Tehran itself.
And these weren't small incidents, were they?
No, these involved thousands of people, often sieges lasting months, with terrible violence inflicted on the Babi communities.
Yet the accounts also speak of incredible courage from the Babis during this time.
Extraordinary courage and faith. You have figures like Mullah Hussein leading the defense at Sheikh Tabarsi against overwhelming odds. Their resilience, their willingness to face death rather than recant their faith, it's deeply moving.
Mullah Hussein, the first disciple.
Yes. And Vafid in Nairis, another brilliant scholar who became a devoted follower, faced martyrdom there after bravely proclaiming the faith. You also have the story of the 7 martyrs of Tehran, prominent men executed for their beliefs.
It sounds like many of the leading figures perished early on.
Tragically, yes. Many of the most prominent early believers, Quddus, Mullah Hussein, Vafid, another major figure called Ojat in Zanjan, even the Bab's own maternal uncle were martyred during this initial 1844-1853 period.
And the letters of the living, his closest disciples.
The majority of them, yes. They met their martyrdoms before the Bab himself did, sacrificing their lives in these various upheavals across Persia. The cost was immense.
Which brings us to the Bab's own martyrdom in 1850, a central, tragic event of this period. How did that come about?
After imprisonments in Maku and then Chirik and the examination in Tabriz, the authorities, pushed by the clergy and the Emir Niyam, decided on execution. He was brought back to Tabriz for this purpose in July 1850.
And the execution itself, there are accounts of something unusual happening.
Extremely unusual. He was suspended on a wall alongside a young devotee, Anis. A regiment of soldiers fired. When the smoke cleared, the Bab was gone.
Gone. Just vanished.
Vanished from sight. The ropes were cut by the bullets, but he was nowhere to be seen. His companion, Anis, was standing there, completely unharmed.
That must have caused chaos.
Utter confusion and fear among the soldiers and officials. The execution squad reportedly refused to fire again. The Bab was eventually found back in his cell, calmly finishing a conversation he'd been having with his amanuensis before being taken out.
Finishing a conversation, that's astounding.
It's one of the most dramatic and, well, miraculous accounts in the faith history. But the authorities were determined. They brought in a different regiment.
And the second attempt?
The second time, the bullets found their mark. The Bab and his devoted companion were martyred together. His final reported words were directed towards the crowd, assuring them of the truth of his cause.
A truly dramatic end to his earthly ministry. What happened to their bodies afterwards?
It was incredibly disrespectful. Their remains were apparently thrown into a ditch outside the city walls, left exposed. Guards were posted.
But they weren't left there indefinitely.
No. Some courageous Babis managed, under cover of darkness and at great risk, to retrieve the bodies. They were then hidden, beginning a long, secret journey over many decades before finally being interred in the shrine on Mount Carmel where they rest today. But that initial act showed the depth of animosity.
So the Bab is martyred in 1850. We're still within our 1844-1853 time frame. What was the immediate impact on the Babi community in those last few years of the decade?
It was devastating, obviously. The leader was gone. Persecution intensified even further under Emir Niyam. The community was scattered, reeling, facing incredible danger. It was a period of great darkness and uncertainty for them.
A very difficult time. But was there any sense of direction emerging?
Amidst the turmoil, yes. Baha'u'llah, who had been a prominent Babi from early on, increasingly became a figure of strength and guidance for the remaining believers. His own declaration was still some years away after this period ends, but even in these immediate post-martyrdom years, he was becoming that central point of rallying and hope for the terrified and scattered community.
So the seeds the Bab planted about him whom God shall make manifest were already, in a sense, beginning to take root, even if not fully recognized yet.
Exactly. The foundation was laid, the direction was pointed, even amidst the intense suffering and loss of that final part of the decade.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive focused purely on 1844 to 1853, this initial ministry of the Bab, what are the main things you think we should take away? What really defines this incredibly intense decade?
Well, I think first is the sheer speed and drama of it all. A new faith bursts onto the scene with a revolutionary message. Second, the power of that initial revelation, the Qayyumul Azma, challenging everything. Third, the immediate and incredibly fierce opposition it provoked from both religious and state powers.
And the response of the believers.
Absolutely. Fourth, the extraordinary, almost unbelievable faith, heroism, and sacrifice shown by those early Babs in the face of that persecution. Fifth, the Bab's constant focus on preparing the way for him whom God shall make manifest. That forward-looking aspect is key.
And finally, the tragic martyrdom of the Bab himself in 1850, a pivotal moment within this foundational era.
Right. It's a decade defined by explosive revelation, intense opposition, incredible devotion, future anticipation, and ultimate sacrifice.
It really sets the stage, doesn't it? This incredibly turbulent beginning clearly forms the bedrock upon which the Baha'i faith was then built in the subsequent decades.
No question. Understanding this period is essential to understanding what came next.
It really leaves you with a question, doesn't it? How does grasping these, well, violent and challenging origins help us understand how a faith develops later, how it impacts the world? What does this intense decade tell you about what it takes for profound religious and social change to even begin?
That's definitely something to think about. The cost, the conviction, the forces at play.
Something for you, our listeners, to ponder. We really encourage you to look deeper into the Bab's life, his teachings, and of course the history of the Baha'i faith that followed. Thank you for joining us on this focused deep dive into a truly formative decade.